Good evening and welcome to the first hour of the Sunday sermon of the Velocity of Now. It's September, let me check the date, 11th, believe it or not. September 11th, huh? I didn't even know it was going to be this date on the Sunday when I decided to bring up the topic for this show, because tonight's show is about life after death. And I know I've been covering subjects like this a lot lately, but this stuff is interesting. I'm trying to do it from a different point of view and trawling through my own huge personal archives and pulling out things now and again that you might find interesting. And as the broadcast time of this show is Sunday, it seems somehow kind of appropriate to do this. I know it's a Christian holiday, but it still seems appropriate somehow, maybe to kind of offset those awful religious programs that used to be on the TV, like Songs of Praise, which is often hosted by Ted Heath, the former British Prime Minister and close friend of Jimmy Savile, who was a notorious paedophile. So maybe we can actually do something to have a discussion on spirituality and spiritual topics that's not so much Christian orientated. My website is www.thomassheridanarts.com and www.streetdruid.net. If you'd like to support my work, share my videos. If you've no money, if you have a few quid to spend and you haven't read a book, buy a book. I produce, I market, I'm a productive member of society. I don't take donations. Now, this show is about, I was looking through the pile I have in the back there and pulling stuff out of the attic, and I found something from a Theosophist essay from 1917. Now, I know some of you scream, oh, Theosophy, oh, Blavatsky, well, Steiner, well, let's just forget about this and let's dive into it. I mean, I'm learning just like the rest of you. I've nothing against Theosophy. I think a lot of good things have come out of it, and it's essentially what became alternative spirituality today. It had to start somewhere, and it began with the Theosophists. Now, what makes this essay poignant and unique is it was written by a man called George Herbert White, and he wrote it in 1917. He was along with his wife Ethel, he was the co-founder of the International Order of the Round Table in 1908. This was a Boy and Girl Scouts type movement that was very similar to the Völkisch movements that were happening in Germany at the time, the Völkisch youth movements, but it was not racial or political. It was purely to make young people better members of society, very similar to Boy and Girl Scouts, and they were based on the idea of the Arthur and the Grail Knights to inspire that kind of thing. And it was White himself, George Herbert White, for G.H. White, was born to a family of Theosophists in 1878, and he joined the society in 1894, and he married his wife Ethel Mallet in 1908. He worked as a secretary to Charles W. Leadbeater, who was a big shot in the Theosophical movement, and he was also the assistant manager of the Theosophical Publishing House in London. He established in 1908 the Order of the Round Table, and he was a senior knight from 1907 until 1917. When Charles Webster Leadbeater took his place. Now, what makes this essay especially profound is that it was written, it's about life after death, and it was written published just before he died. Now, he joined as a volunteer of a hospital unit in France in 1914 during World War I. He became a second lieutenant in the Irish Rifles in 1916, and then he was assigned to military duty in Malta, and he did research on the Knights of Malta and St. John, and then he was eventually awarded the Military Cross for military service in Jerusalem, and in 1917, but he was shot and killed, so it was posthumous. So we have an interesting essay here written by a man who's a theosophist talking about what happens when you die, only for him to ironically find out a few months later. So this is What Happens After Death by George Herbert Wythe. What happens after death? It is sometimes considered to be a rather bad form to talk about a subject like this. Some people seem to prefer to go on year after year, shutting their eyes to the fact that they themselves must pass through the great gateway until suddenly some illness seizes them, and when they see grey faces round their bed, they realize that their time has come, and they are not prepared for the great change. The war has altered this in many ways. Thousands of men have lived for months face to face with death. They have seen comrades fall beside them, just a sudden croaking gasp or cry, and the rifle slipping from a nerveless hand, and the pall of many a weary march and long night watch, and many a happy hour behind the line is no more, apparently, than a crushed and gory semblance of a man. Thousands of women at home have spent months of anxious waiting, hardest task of all, while their dear ones have faced danger and hardship in the field. The question, what happens after death, is of pressing interest to all these thousands of people. I know that many men speculate about it and sometimes discuss the matter among themselves. Is there a hell, and if so, shall we go there, or is there another place? It would be unnatural and unreasonable did they not do so, and unnatural as though a man who knows that he would be sitting out for a far-off country at very short notice made no inquiry as to the kind of place it was, what language was spoken, and, above all, what he should take there with him. Like hundreds of thousands of other soldiers, I have in the past 2 years attended dozens of church parades and listened to dozens of sermons, but I have not once heard any padre attempt to give an answer to the obvious vital question. The teachings of a church is confused and therefore vague on the matter. On the one hand, it is a very old familiar view that the dead who fall asleep in Jesus remain asleep until the day when the last trumpet shall sound, whereupon they will rise from their graves in their bodies, where they used to wear, but changed into a wonderful manner and made immortal. They will then enter upon a career of eternal happiness or eternal misery. This view is to be found expressed in many well-known hymns. On the other hand, there are those within the church who hold the so-called dead do not remain unconscious but are awake and live in another world, but their doings there are shrouded in a very great obscurity and mystery. Now there are a few ascertained facts about life and death which full of significance, and this article is written with the hope that it may fall into the hands of some of you longing for information. Very much remains to be found out, but what has already been discovered is of the utmost importance. It is necessary that I should explain the authority for the information so that the reader may judge for himself as to its value. There are 3 separate lines of research into this matter, which have been at work for many years and have been converging all the time. The first of these is spiritualism. More than half a century ago, a great deal of attention was attracted by some remarkable occurrences which took place in America, but were repeated in England and in many other countries. Small groups of people met and, with the help of a medium, they received an actual communication from those who had passed into the next world. A medium is a person of a particular nervous constitution who is able to go into a semi-conscious condition called a trance, and in that condition converse with the so-called dead. Had this happened but once or twice, it might as well be put down to fraud or imagination. But since those early manifestations, these experiments have been repeated and checked by thousands of people, and have been convinced that they have spoken with the departed. In the course of over 20 years' study of the matter, I've met dozens of people who have given me their own personal testimony on the point, and in many cases they told me that a weight of hopeless despair had been lifted from them. The second line of evidence took its rise in the last century out of the 19th century, when a body of scientific men turned their activities to psychic phenomena and found that in 1882 the Society for Psychical Research, with the object of investigating in a thoroughly scientific manner all matters relating to the psychic experience. In the Annals of the Society for Psychical Research, as far back as 1894, we find Mr. Balfour in his presidential capacity saying, "I think the time has come when it is desirable that the leaders of scientific thought in this country and elsewhere should recognize that there are well-attested facts which, though they do not easily fit into the framework of sciences of organized experience as they conceive it, yet require investigation and an explanation, which is the burden of the duty of science, and all evidence to assist us is in investigating." End quote. The Society, during the course of its existence, had accumulated and sifted many facts testifying to after-death existence, which may be considered as proved, since it was held by such men as Sir William Crookes, Sir J. Thomson, Sir Oliver Lodge, and Lord Raleigh in England, and on the continent by Professors Richer at Paris, James of Harvard, Camille Flammarion, and Dr. Hyslop, and Lombroso. The latter, in his book After Death Existence, says that never was a man more averse by nature and training to the study of spiritualism, but, being forced to observe a certain case brought under his notice, he set out to study it and became a convert to it. But the information we have to submit on after-death existence is obtained in somewhat different ways. Both spiritualists and psychical researchers are pursuing their investigations chiefly, if not entirely, on communications received through a sensitive body who is able to register impressions on the physical sights and hearing. But the information that is convincing many today is obtained from the individual to develop a capacity to see and hear in other worlds where the dead live. That's dead in quotations. An analogy which may help to explain how it is done. Suppose we have a drop of water from a pond, which we are told is teeming with life. We cannot appreciate this statement, which our present unaided vision, but if we take a microscope, we find the statement is literally true. For thus aided, we can see the teeming life for ourselves. Now, according to the school of thought upon which we have drawn, it is the theosophical contribution to the solution of the problem, the true self in all of us that has already several subtle bodies through which it functions, and these are related in different planes to which they severely belong. A person cannot, for example, function in the physical world without a physical vehicle. Neither can he function on what is called the astral or mental or casual planes unless he has a corresponding body suitable for manifestation in these more subtle worlds. We all already possess in more or less developed form these bodies, and these are what we use after death. But in the course of evolution, it has become possible to consciously function therein while still living the physical life. Those who can do so are able to leave the physical body and go to the other worlds and speak directly, face to face with the so-called dead, quote unquote. The present writer possesses no such power, having reached that stage where he can consciously use these higher vehicles for that purpose. But he knows he possesses them, and he believes that he will someday reach the stage in his evolution where he'll be able to say with St. Paul, "O death, where is thy victory?" For he will be able to live in a body which does not die. Now, by themselves, any one of these three independent lines of research might be held to be insufficient evidence. Where spiritualism was the only method used, then for those who had not themselves experienced with a satisfactory medium, the evidence might well be held to be insufficient. Were theosophy the only method, then the information given by the group of theosophical investigators might be deemed inadequate, especially by those who do not know these investigators personally, as I do, and who have not the convictions that I have as to their absolute good faith and their trustworthiness. Then again, Did we rely solely upon the research of a small but brilliant band of scientific researchers, we might feel that their results were rather sketchy and imperfect, and we might prefer to suspend their judgment for a while. But then these 3 lines of research are in agreement upon certain main facts. Then the united evidence is so strong that any reasonable man is justified in saying that they are true facts, while he keeps his mind open for the consideration of other facts and numerous details which still remain to be discovered. It is my purpose now to set down in plain language some ascertained facts obtained from the second of the above sources of knowledge. The first fact which has been ascertained is that life cannot be destroyed. If 3 electric lamps are burning in a room and one of them is suddenly broken, the light which was glowing there is at once extinguished, but the electricity which caused the light is not destroyed nor hurt in any other way. It is no longer acts through a broken lamp, but otherwise it is unaffected. If a man is in full vigour of life and is suddenly struck down by a bullet or blown to pieces by a shell, then although the body is shattered and broken, the life which dwelt in it, that life which was really the man, is unharmed as the electricity in the broken lamp. So long as the life remained in the body, the man himself was there, the brain lived, and the man could think and speak, and feel sorrow and joy, and see the world of his fellow human beings. The shattered brain can no longer do this, but he who thought and spoke had felt sorrow and joy is unharmed. He is the life, and death does not touch him at all, although it destroys the body which he used. He still has the same power to think and to speak and to love. He is like the man who has taken off a heavy overcoat which lies on the ground. Just turning a page here. Which lies on the ground while he stands erect beside it. Immediately following the death of the body, there is a period of day, or sometimes longer, during which the dead man remains profoundly unconscious of anything that is going on around him, and is engaged in a careful and minute recollection of the events of the life just ended. Pictures of that life pass before his mind, and he examines them intently. Many men who have been apparently drowned, but have been restored to consciousness some hours afterwards by artificial respiration, have brought back a recollection of this reviewing of all the events which had happened during the life that just closed. It is recommended that people who are present with those who are passing over should not disturb the process by strong manifestations of grief and other suffering. Testimony is unanimous that, on awakening from this period of unconscious, the vast majority of people are welcomed into the new world by dear ones who have preceded them. The mother is there to welcome the son, the husband is there to wife, and those whom there exist deep ties of love know that the loved one has passed through the great gateway, and they are there to greet them and to help him. This is true and beautiful and comforting thought, which should be widely known, for it makes death easier to face. The question then naturally arises, what kind of body do we have in the next world? As he leaves his fleshly body behind him, the dead quote-unquote man automatically uses subtler body, which are made of the finer and more ethereal matter of the next world. It is too fine to be seen by our eyes, but it's not too fine for the more refined powers of perception, which are dormant in all of us, but have been developed by those who are clairvoyant. He uses first his astral or emotional body, which is similar in experience to the fleshly body, but in it a man can move about with complete freedom. When in the subtle body, if he thinks of a place and wills to be in that place, or to see a friend, he is there at once, for thought is the force from which he finds immediate outward expression. Illness and fatigue are quite unknown to it. Usually the dead man's first sensation in regaining consciousness after death is one of extraordinary well-being and vigour. The next world is divided into 3 great regions, about which it is desirable to say a few words. The lowest of these regions is composed of matter of the density kind to be found in those regions. It is rather like the sediment which settles on the bottom of some liquid, and the next world interpenetrates the world of ours, and it also stretches far up into the heavens above us. This lower region is one which is deepest within our earth. The second, or immediate region, touches the earth's surface but rises up above it into the sunlight and above all the clouds beyond the stretches of the third highest region. Now here on earth a man may live a debased life and indulge in many vices, and he may coarsen his body and be full of vile disease due to his indulgence, but if he puts on suitable clothes, he may succeed in passing for a gentleman among those who see him casually. They see the clothes and not the man. In the next world, all such disguises are impossible. The dead, quote unquote, man, as I have already said, automatically draws around him the body which is to be his, but the body corresponds exactly to the kind of man that he is. If he is the kind of man of coarse thought and desire, then he will find himself possessed of a body which is coarse, and he will not be able to distinguish the terrible symptoms which his degraded habits impress upon him. If such a body will be confined to the lowest regions of the next world, and will not be able to raise itself out for a long time, just as a stone cannot rise to the surface of the sea, he will be in the society of the unfortunate people who are in like condition to himself. He will go on desiring the things which satisfy him while on earth, but no longer has the fleshly body. He cannot gratify his desires. Accordingly, this is a place of suffering and purgation, where the wrong thoughts and acts done in the physical life wash themselves out through physical pain. But a great deal of wicked nonsense has been written and spoken about hell. It has been said that it is a place of eternal punishment to which all unbelievers would be sent, a most appalling blasphemy upon the sacred name of the Divine Father. The only hell that exists is the lowest regions in the next world, and if a man goes there not because he does not believe in or this dogma, but because he is such a character, the passport which leads to this unhappy region are lust, hatred, and cruelty. But the man who unhappily finds himself in the lowest regions only remains there long enough to gain the experience and purification necessary to enable him to rise into the happier regions above. Knowing this gives us the reason why all self-seeking desires should be mastered and overcome before passing through the gateway of death. The vast majority of ordinary decent living men and women do in fact pass at once into the intermediate region, where they are at once experience that sense of well-being to which I have referred. In that region they can still be closely in touch with all that is happening on earth. They can visit the old home, they can see their family and their friends, although they themselves cannot be seen or conversed with. They have, however, a remarkable power of pouring out love and blessing, especially if those who remain on earth think of them quietly and happily. The heavy depression of intense grief tends to close the channel. I'm going to take a break from the article here. That's an important one. People who are intensely grieving and intensely sorrowful for a long time about their loved one, according to this theosophical idea, actually prevents a kind of a interdimensional sensation of bonding with the lost loved one. And you know something, this would probably tie in an awful lot with my own ideas of a trauma vampire. Trauma vampires seek to play on the trauma in your life so you do not heal from the experience. They keep bringing it up over and over again. And I have to say, this theosophical idea of the over grieving for someone who died actually prevents you from having a kind of a post-mortal relationship of sorts with them. That actually makes a lot of sense. Returning to the text. The third reason is a very wonderful place, to which men who while on earth lived more on the mental and spiritual plane chiefly go. They are able while there to continue with great advantage the researches and studies which interested them while they lived on earth. The whole of these regions form a vast sphere, which interpenetrates and surrounds the earth, stretching out far into space beyond us. It is full of varied interests and activities, fuller than this life in some ways, and it is free from sickness, hunger, and fatigue. In it are to be found the many souls of great advancement who devote themselves to the guiding and helping of their fellows. Many instances are related of those who were unhappy enough to find themselves for a time in the lowest region, being visited by an angel of light who was really one of the more advanced souls, who explained things to the unfortunate individual and showed what he or she should do in order to rise up to the happiest regions. These guides and leaders teach those to dwell in the higher regions also, so that every man, woman, and child is in touch with someone who knows more about things than they do and is able to help them upwards. For the vast next world is not a place of permanent dwelling place. All the testimonies agree that beyond there's a region which has the name of heaven is given to the Christian religion. But little information has been gleaned regarding the furthest region. But it is abundantly clear that every man, woman, and child gets there eventually. The man who has suffered in hell profits by his suffering and rises up, purified and ennobled, and in time he too enters for a time the heaven world. For none are so debased but they have some unselfish thoughts and acts to their credit, and these find their consummation on the plane to which they belong. For here, as elsewhere, there is the exact correspondence between sowing and reaping, for we live in a universe where the law on cause and effect is ever operative, and just as it is in the present life, we reap good and ill results where we have sown the corresponding seeds, so that in the life beyond, the harvest is in the exact accord with the seed sown. And most people sow a little of all kinds, but the physical, the astral, and the mental body die, each in its own turn, and only then that the man enters upon the highest heaven, into the permanent vehicle, which is called the casual body. The majority of men have as yet be very little consciousness of such a height as this. They remain dreamily unobservant and scarcely awake, but what visions they have is true, however limited must be by their lack of development. Still, every time they return to the earth life, these limitations grow smaller, and they themselves grow greater. As this continues, we are quoting from Mr. Ledbetter's textbook on Theosophy here, the casual life grows larger and larger as compared to the existence of the lower levels, and as he grows, the man becomes not only capable of receiving and giving, but then indeed is the triumph approaching, for he is learning the lesson of the Christ, learning the crowning glory of sacrifice, the supreme delight of pouring out all his life for the helping of his fellow man, the devotion of the self to all, the celestial strength of human service, of all those splendidly heavenly forces to the aid of the struggling sons of the earth. End quote. And the final paragraph by George Herbert Waite is, it would take up every page in this annual to give a full digest on the subject, but those who are interested may study with advantage the volume from which our last quotation was made. And the man, as I said, who wrote that died soon afterwards. I don't know. I don't know if that's true. I haven't studied, or how accurate that is towards how I'm reading it. I haven't studied Theosophy enough to fully comprehend on that, but it's a more compassionate version of, shall we say, divine punishment. The Christian version of punishment and the Islamic version of afterlife punishment, you go to hell and you remain there. And usually the greatest sin of all is blasphemy. So basically, you can kill as many people as you want, but as long as you abide by either the Quran or the Bible, you'll go to heaven. And with this one, it's basically, there is a moral judgment afterwards. Is that true? I really don't know. But you enter into the center of the earth and work your way out through a sort of a regrowth or rebirth. There are things in here that are compatible with lots of things. I'm hearing Vedic kind of ideas. I'm hearing Gnostic kind of ideas, and Theosophy being basically the first version of the New Age. It's not surprising that these are in here. The idea of being trapped on Earth before moving on is absolutely, or not trapped, but remaining on Earth before moving on is completely universal. I mean, it's so universal, it's never even talked about. We all hear the story of like Jewish and Irish families when the loved one dies, they stop the clocks. Well, the Irish one stopped the clocks, and they both covered the mirror. The reason why the old Irish folks used to stop the clock was because that in the ghost world, the spirit would see the hands whizzing around really fast. And because the spirit world or the fairy world or whatever it is moves at a much higher speed than this life. And secondly, when they looked in the mirror, they wouldn't see their reflection and they would become frightened. And that's why they covered the mirror. You remember in that movie, The Shining, there's the pivotal scene where Jack Torrance is talking to Grady in the bathroom, and he's realizing as he's talking to him that this is the ghost of a dead man who murdered his family. And there's a point where Grady's cleaning Jack Torrance's shirt, his jacket, his denim jacket, and he cleans a spilled drink off his lapel and then goes over to fetch some more water from the tap. And then there's a beautiful scene where Jack Nicholson, who's playing Jack Torrance, looks around Grady and has a stare into the mirror to see if if he can see Grady's reflection or not, or even his own reflection. And we don't know. That's what Stanley Kubrick was such a phenomenal filmmaker, that we don't know what Jack Torrance saw. We just don't know. It was just a very subtle, brief, quick glance at the mirror. Look at the clip up on YouTube, and you'll see that scene. It's very powerful, but that's what he's checking to see: is he dead or is he among the dead? Does Jack have a reflection? Does Grady have a reflection? It's very, very important in the context of the story, of the narrative. But however, it's left out of the movie, and that's what makes these films so one of these things you can watch over and over again and find new things from it. The viewer is the one who has to ascertain what happened at that moment. Is Jack himself dead, having realized that he doesn't see his own reflection in the mirror? And maybe is that why he's killing his son and daughter, his wife and son, in order to bring his family into the world of death with them inside the hotel, the Overlook Hotel. See, that's why this idea of people, dying suddenly. And I read the essay last week about the RAF brigadier who used to actually coach men who died in the RAF quickly to try and explain to them, no, you're dead, you have to go on. I find this attitude, this whole thing completely fascinating. That one specific aspect, I find it incredibly fascinating, mainly because it's such a universal milieu across many spiritual traditions, including Judeo-Christianity and Islam. I'm recording this the night after I just wrote that or read that essay about life after death. I had the most, and I spoke about this on my Facebook page, the most bizarre and intense dream during the night. And what made this dream, why it's so fresh in my mind, I've written this down on my dream diary, which I always do, but I'm also reciting it into the PC, into this audio program, because I want it freshly spoken as well. In the dream, I was at a kind of an alternative speaker conference, but it was not like the usual, alternative speaker scene. It was more like something that was like a live TV special that was like, being broadcast on a major network about alternative subjects. I was one of the speakers, and I was listening to. I was sitting in the audience at the back listening to it. One of the presentations, and there was a woman who I know in real life here came down to me and said the host of the show, who was a very famous celebrity, the compere can't do it because they're not feeling well. Can you host the live TV broadcast tonight? And I said, I don't have a suit. I've only got a T-shirt and a pair of jeans on me. And she says, oh, okay, I understand. I said, I just wouldn't be comfortable interviewing people in a T-shirt and jeans. So the conference is ongoing. And then I walk around the hotel or the conference centre where it's being held, the TV studios, and I go downstairs and I see another old friend from Dublin who I used to be involved in a company with that used to lobby. It was like a corporate lobbying company that we had together. And while I was downstairs, he told me there was a conference going on of all the politicians and the government spooks who had screwed us out of a bunch of money about 12 years ago that they were supposed to pay for some consultation. And he was working as the head waiter in the restaurant, and he was telling me things like he spat and pissed in all their coffee, and the two of us are rolling around laughing. And then somebody really aristocratic like came down and offered to give me a lift out to stay in his house in a posh part of Dublin. It was somewhere on the south side, and we got into his Mercedes, very, very nice Mercedes, and we drove over there to the house. And when we got to the house, he had in the yard this nifty little like scooter motorcycle that was like it was like the small Harley motorcycles with a large engine and the belt-driven back wheel. Like a big rubber belt, and he said to me, if you want, you can borrow it to get back over to Carrick Mines. The Carrick Mines is specifically mentioned in this. Carrick Mines is a neighbourhood in Dublin. And so I got on the motorcycle and I started going over to Carrick Mines, and on the way I was being followed by the police and things like that. So I get over to Carrick Mines, and when I get there, I reach a person's house that I'm staying in. And the person is moving house, and I said, do you want a hand lifting and moving your furniture and stuff? And he says, yeah. So the two of us are lifting the stuff out of the house, and then he says, look up at the sky. And I look up at the sky, and the clouds are all in bits. It's twilight, and there are huge numbers of meteorites in like the Pleiadian type formations. You know, where they come out like in little kind of bursts, and they often have a radial effect coming right at the Earth, and also comets and asteroids and other things like that entering the Earth's atmosphere. And I said, my God, that's some incredible sight. And he was agreeing, and I specifically noted where it happened. It took part. They were coming from where I was standing, because I was aware of the place I was at, from the northeast. They were coming from the northeast, and they were coming from the constellation of Ursa Major, the Great Bear, or the Big Dipper, or whatever you want to call it, the Plough, that constellation. And it was coming towards us low in the sky at twilight. It was definitely in the evening. Now, when this is happening, an airplane flies in, a small light aircraft, and lands in a field across from this house. And out steps this elderly gentleman with a young girl. And he knew me, and he said to me, you know, they think you've stolen the motorcycle, and it's on the news. That's why the cops are following you. And I said, no, I got a loan of the motorcycle. I'm bringing it back tonight. And he says, I'll tell you what, I'll bring it back in the airplane. And I said, and so clear up this misunderstanding. And I said, you really don't want to fly in the sky looking like that, with the clouds all weird pulsating colours. And he goes, you're right, it was quite nerve-wracking flying over here to short distance. The instruments were malfunctioning. The plane was acting very strange. And I says, you can't be bringing a child back up in an airplane like that, and something could go wrong. You know, you could both be killed. And he goes, you're right. And then the little girl is standing by the river across from the light aircraft and over from the front of the house where we are. And she goes, look at this. And we walk over, and there's an egg about the size, an oval-shaped egg, like a regular like chicken or duck egg, but big. I mean, really, really big, about the size of a chocolate Easter egg, about 10 inches long by 8 inches wide, maybe longer, a foot long. And the top of it has snapped off. And inside it is an alien eye, like a reptilian with a slit, staring at us, moving around and looking at us. And then the little girl goes to stamp on the egg to crush it and kill it. And I say, don't do that, because you might get some kind of weird disease off it. And then the old guy looks at us and he says, the aliens are here. The alien invasion has begun. And I was looking around and saying, come on, this is like too much like a horror film, like a Quatermass film. And then I looked up in the sky, and in the dream, I came to the conclusion that an alien invasion had been taking place. Now, what that means, I haven't a clue. The aliens could be metaphors for all kinds of things. But I will say this. It's probably the first time in about 7 years I've had these wildly vivid dreams like this. I mean, wildly, wildly vivid. And it's really bizarre. I really cannot understand it. I really can't understand this dream at all. And I'm pretty good at dream analysis, but like I told you before, I generally tend not to analyze dreams the next day. I tend to look for a pattern, but this one is like the ones from 9 years ago. It came out of the blue. It has similar motifs. The sky is incredibly vivid. There's elements of fire, in this case meteorites burning out all over around where I am. And I've never had a dream about aliens ever. I've never ever had a dream about aliens ever. And the early part of the dream of me being at this major conference of alternative speakers that was going out all over the world on live TV and everything. What this means, I don't know. Obviously, some people are going to say I've had some kind of premonition, but an alien could be a virus. You know what I'm saying? This could be a dream of a portent of some new super virus that comes along, like an AIDS kind of thing that people don't know about. This could be and the collective subconscious is speaking to me. But this dream is I think is highly significant, and you know where the comments are below, and have a discussion on that. Thank you. And speaking of the dead and lamentations and this kind of thing, I was reminded the other day about the ancient and Scottish-Irish practice of keening, or keening. Depends on how you pronounce it. It's keening in Ireland usually, and keening in Scotland. It was outlawed by both the Catholic and the Protestant churches in the early Victorian era. And what keening is a traditional form of vocal lament for the dead. And that women would wear shawls at funerals. And it was also used in civil disobedience and protest. So it was a kind of a curse. If there was a civil disobedience against, say, the state or anything, a sheriff taking a home up, kneeling would take place, and these women would cry and weep and reference it from this, and you can find references from the 7th, 8th, and 12th centuries in Ireland, incredibly extensive. It was used so much. It's common all over Europe. You had the professional mourners in Southern Europe. You have them all over Southern Europe. But at a funeral or at the procession, what the keeners would do, the women, would be to recite. They weren't just wailing and howling. They would have precise geologies and praise for the dead and emphasis on the woeful condition of the world they left behind, done in a vocal lament. So it wasn't just like howling and screaming. There was a song involved in it, a poetic song. It was always carried out by more. Sometimes you had one, but often there were several women. And there was also a chorus to it that everyone involved would do. There was all kinds of rocking, clapping, all kinds of things. And the band Shannon T, who was the kneeling woman, the main one, was paid for their services because they were considered so valuable. This is the classic. It's a lot like the classic death wail or the mourning lament. And you even have that in Australia. And the Christians have gone to extents to wipe the kneeling out. And yet it appears all over the world. It's very, very common. Why did they ban it? Why did they take it down? I don't know. But in Ireland, we can possibly point to the fact that it directly comes from pagan tradition. And in particular, the goddess Breed, who later became the Christian, was transformed into the later Christian saint, Saint Bridget. Now, Breed was the warrior of goddess and of the fire. And she was one of the most beloved goddesses of the Tuatha De Danann, and is still in Ireland held in great respect. She was the daughter of the Dagda. The Dagda was the good king, or the good god, who resided at the Boonaboyne in Newgrange in County Meath. And he was the king of the Danans and the Morrigan. When Bridget was born, it was said that a flame shot straight from her head to heaven, giving rise to the phrase used by the poet American, the Druid American, when he talks about "I am the fire in the minds of men." Breed was also the warrior goddess of the sun, healing, fertility, and especially crafts and poetry, holy wells and fires. So for all extensive purposes, Breed was the female druid, the druidess, or she was at least the archetype of the female druid idea, and this may have been also why the church banned the practice. There's also this suggestion that Breed had a special connection to those with psychic ability and the power to heal. You get a lot of people who are involved in healing in Ireland, and healing and counsellors. They will often have an effigy or a picture of Saint Bridget or Breed on their wall. She's almost like the pagan patron saint. I know that sounds like a bit of a misnomer, but for the use of description of, she's like the pagan patron saint of the healers. Now, in the legend, in the mythology itself, Breed was subject to an arranged marriage with Breis, who was a Fomorian, and she had three sons by him. Following the loss of Nuada's hand in the second battle of Moytura, Nuada lost his hand. Sorry, in the first battle he lost his hand, and he was given a silver robotic arm by a druid. Breis became the king of the Danans, but he proved to be selfish and cruel, and as a result, Breed is said to have brought the practice of kneeling or lamenting to Ireland. During the Battle of Moytura, Bridget was seen as an intermediary between the Danans, the Tuatha De Danann, and the Fomorians, although it is suspected that she was ultimately a spy for the Tuatha De Danann. The Tuatha De Danann ultimately won the battle on the day and took control of Ireland until the Milesian Gaels arrived, and basically magic no longer existed in Ireland. Bridget was eventually subsumed into the Christian religion, as you know, as Saint Bridget of Kildare. You can go visit her well there. And Bridget is associated with the pagan festival of Imbolc, which is 31st of January every year. And on that day, wicker crosses are made in her honour. It has been suggested that they are sun symbols. For various they are. It really is a swastika. The St. Bridget's cross is really Breed's swastika. And that highlighting the 4 seasons of the year, and has no relation to Christianity. As you know from my book, The Druid Code, how I make such a big point of the number 4 and its symbolism to Druidic and also all kinds of ancient similar traditions. The number 4 is integral and pivotal in our understanding of both ourselves and our ultimate relationship to the world beyond here. I was talking to one of my friends there recently who lives near Mortlake in London, where John Dee resided and kept his laboratory, so to speak, and it was where, I think the building lasted until the 1800s, though Dee had nothing to do with it. It was knocked down and replaced by a brewery, and the brewery lasted until the late 70s, and then the brewery was replaced by apartment buildings, and the area still has a lot of atmosphere even to this day. Now, there's something interesting in that was brought up when I was talking to this young lady, is that if you're performing magic, people often say, well, the stereotype of the magician living in the spooky tower or the scary building. Well, there's a reason for that. Places that are energetically, not neutral, but energetically stable are best for performing magic in. So, for instance, the middle of a large city centre is not an ideal place for magic. Neither is a place subject to intense climatic changes where you have very powerful winters and very powerful summers. Magic works best, and particularly alchemy, if you have a location where it's relatively stable. By stable, I mean it could be happy, it could be sad, it could be moody, it could be melancholy. But once it doesn't change, this adds to the lack of interference in the process and in the rites. So you would pick a house or pick a building that would be a little bit spooky, that has a kind of a bit of a spooky energy to it, and is never going to change. Well, that's a good thing for doing magic, because you have an ability, you have like Jung's tower that he built at the end of his life. You have a stable environment, a stability, and the building itself represents the personality of the person inside. Spooky is only spooky if you see it as an adversarial process or milieu to what you are accustomed with. So, for instance, to an ancient heathen and to someone like me, Catholic churches are often terrifying places. But to most Catholics, they're places of comfort and reflection and hope. To me, they don't have that at all. To me, they're temples of terrifying death and slaughter, with images of a man being butchered on them. The same thing, you go into any religious tradition that's different than yours and be affected by it. So when I go past a spooky house or a spooky building, I don't find it frightening in any way. Where a person who is of a same reason I quite like graveyards. I've always loved graveyards. In fact, when I was a teenager and had no money, one of my girlfriends and I from school used to go to this vast ancient necropolis in Dublin called Glasnevin Cemetery, which has a couple of million graves in it. It stretches out over this sort of like ancient landscape, and it's like something else. It's the ultimate horror film. Although they've sanitized it in recent years, in the last 10, 20 years, they've sanitized and cleaned up all the really quote unquote spooky parts. But we used to go on dates there. We used to go on dates and take photographs and sketch the moss covered decaying Victorian tombs. And let me tell you, it was incredibly sexy. If you haven't done it, don't try it. But it was almost like there was stability there. So the two of us were sort of like complicated teenagers who had difficulty fitting into the societies we were born. So we could run away to this city of the dead, almost a different reality. And it was very much a different reality than what we were living in. And there we attained stability to be boyfriend and girlfriend without being laughed at or being beat up, and stability in terms to develop our artistic and creative insights, such as sketching and art, and she wrote poetry and things like that. And I have very happy memories of sitting on a dead body 6 feet below in some Victorian, necropolis that was badly maintained, and the fringes of it where the poor mad people were buried, or mass graves. And there was more comfort there than there was on a busy street, or especially in school hall, where you would be subject to abuse because you were a bit different or a bit strange or anything like that. There was no escape there. So that sort of sense of being rattled constantly by the social conflicts led to an inability for us to grow as people. But by going to this large cemetery, we could grow as people, grow as individuals, especially because we have a respite from the instability of the social order towards the stability of the spooky domains. And this is why places like Mortlake, and why the wizard lives in a dark tower or in an old spooky building or somewhere, it has two purposes: to scare away the morons, but also to have the sense of stability. Stability aids creativity in the internal sense, where instability aids creativity in the social sense. So suppose you have a society that's falling apart. you'll produce great rock bands, produce great visual artists, and so on. You'll produce movements and youth scenes and that kind of thing. But if you have instability at the at the personal level, the individual will seek solace from the social order and then go deep into themselves, into him and herself, in order to create a new reality within that silence, that gap that are allowed and given by the respite. That's the first hour over. I hope there's plenty of food for thought there, and I will see you in the second hour of the Sunday sermon of the Velocity of Now, September 11th, 2016. Thank you very, very much.